Hi, my name is Melinda JENNIS, and I want to welcome you to Unite for Inclusion. I'm really excited to have you here, and this week we're going to talk about how we could take 3 simple things and put them into our classroom to be able to make them more inclusive. Now, I want to say to people that, the things that I talk about in all of these different training videos, and this is the training video this week, but everything within this training video can be transferred into community. It can be transferred into employment. If you're a CEO, if you're, an entrepreneur, you can use all of these strategies and principles within your area, within your environment, and you will find that it will help you to become more inclusive. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that a lot of times when I talk about inclusion, I hear people say, well, I kind of I hope that next year my classroom will be more inclusive, or I hope my kids can become more inclusive, or I hope I can learn to do that more. Hope is never a strategy. I love hope. You always have to have hope, but it's not a strategy. And as people, what we've got to do is realize, and I tell my kids this all the time, I work a lot and have for about 19 years in after school programs. I'm a coach on the fields and things like that. And I work with children all the time. And the first thing that I want people to understand is that inclusion is a verb. A lot of times we use it almost as a noun, that we kind of sit here, we talk about inclusion. Yeah, I wish we were more inclusive. No, inclusion is a verb, and we've got to make it that way. We've got to make decisions. We've got to take action. And so the first thing that I tell people about inclusion is be intentional. Be intentional about seeing inclusion happen in your classroom. Think about it. Plan for it. Every day, think about how can I put inclusion more into the activities that we're doing and some of the actions that I have as a teacher and some of the curriculum, some of the things that I'm talking about, maybe some of the activities that we're going to do as a group. How can I make it more inclusive for my children? But be intentional about it. Think about it. Now, the first 3 things that I want to talk about is number 1, and you're going to hear me always say that, is the most important person in the picture for inclusion is you as the role model. You need to demonstrate inclusion to your students. And this is so important because I will tell you, you hear that, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Well, I will tell you that a demonstration, that a role model is worth the same kind of value. We could talk about inclusion all day long. We could read about it in a textbook. We could write about it in an essay. But when they see it demonstrated in front of them, it means more to them. So as a teacher, as a person that's out there as a role model for children, go out there and be a demonstration of inclusion. Look for ways that you can talk about inclusion, but show them an action of inclusion. And show them how, just as simple as how included do your children feel in your classroom? Do you take inventory of that every day? Is there maybe one student that just kind of gets under your skin a little bit and it's a little harder to include him? What are you doing to overcome that within yourself? Being a demonstration for inclusion for children is unbelievably important as a role model. The second thing that I would say that's just as important is to be transparent. I always say that inclusion is kind of something that we make progress towards. We're not perfect at it. And, as a teacher or as a role model, be transparent about ways that you make mistakes in inclusion. Be honest about the fact that maybe you went to the store and maybe you saw somebody and it was kind of like, ooh, that person, I just, I don't know. I don't like what they're wearing. I don't like what they look like. I don't like how they're acting. And you kind of give off this negative energy that really kind of communicates to that person that you're excluding them. Talk to your students about that. Be open. Be open about the fact that you're not perfect. Tell them how you're working on inclusion all the time and some of the mistakes that you've had, and opening up that dialogue with some of your students is really going to help them to understand that, hey, this is progress. It's not perfection. And the third thing is to place emphasis on the contrast of inclusion versus exclusion. In the first chapter of my book, Include Me, I talk about how my son and I were on a soccer field. My son was 4 years old. He's multiply disabled. We went out onto a soccer field and we were told to leave. Now, not only was the coach not real nice, but none of the people there stood up for him, and it was pretty clear they didn't want him there either. And about 5-10 minutes later, I found another coach, a couple of fields over, that had a middle school, team that he was working with. And I basically went over and I said, could you just play with him for like 5-10 minutes? I mean, Just give him the opportunity to play soccer. I mean, that's all he wants. The kids took him out on the field, and I can't tell you the smile that was on every child's face that was on that field, not just my son. The contrast of exclusion and what those people feel by moving somebody off or excluding somebody. What did they gain? What did they feel? What did their actions cause? Versus the contrast of the other group and how they included my son and helped him to feel like he belonged. In essence, they also felt more like they belonged because they put that feeling into the whole thing of playing soccer collectively and uniting to play soccer for one common cause, which was to make sure that everybody on that field at that time felt included. And that's an important thing to put out there, is the contrast. Johnny, if you exclude, Tommy over here, okay, what are you going to feel? That decision, that action causes a feeling on both sides, on Tommy's side, on Johnny's side. What happens if we take a different decision and we take a different course of action? How are you going to feel if you do that? The contrast of showing them what their actions can produce as an outcome, good versus bad. And be careful when we talk about inclusion if we exclude somebody we're bad, because a lot of times, yes, the action was bad, but a lot of times kids will take that as, oh, I'm bad. I'm bad. I'm a bad person. And they're not a bad person. They can always change their actions. Their actions are not great, but they're not bad internally. They can change who they are. They can become more inclusive. And talk to them about how they can do that and how the next time when they take a different action that produces a better outcome, they're going to feel good, but also the recipient of that is going to feel better too. And so, the contrast of exclusion versus inclusion and what that makes us feel is incredibly important to be able to do. I always tell kids that, inclusion is an opportunity. It's almost like you're out, trying to find a treasure. When you find it, when you make it happen, it's just an incredible feeling when you contribute to being able to, stop for a few moments and making someone else feel seen and heard and valued. How that makes you feel as well. And I tell students a lot that, when we are actively including other people, we also will feel more included. It's kind of like Isaac Newton's law of gravity. What goes up has to come down. The same thing applies for inclusion. The more inclusive we become, the more included we'll feel. So it's important to understand and get those kids to seek after the feeling of good, rather than this crummy feeling of having excluded somebody that, you can't escape but feeling bad. So let's just recap really quick. First of all, inclusion is not, it's not hope. Hope isn't a strategy. We've got to be intentional about it. And the first thing that we have to do is demonstrate it. Become that picture worth 1,000 words, okay? Number 2, be transparent. Inclusion is about making progress, not being perfect. And number 3, showing the contrast about what are actions and the outcomes. What is it that you want? Do you feel it to feel good? Do you want to become a person who is known for how they include people? Or do you want to become known as this bully and this person over here that excludes people intentionally to make them feel bad? What do you gain? So again, emphasize to students all the time. And I'll say, to employers, employees, and people that are out there in the community, same thing applies to you. These principles are true in almost every environment that you want to put them to. I will say that the more that I work towards inclusion and the more that I teach it and the more I train people to do it, and it's a creative process, inclusion is like drawing a picture. It can be anything that you want it to be, any color that you want it to be. It can be any kind of shape you want it to be. But the outcome of inclusion is always positive. It's always positive. It doesn't happen always in the time frame that you want it to, and it doesn't always happen in the way that you want it to. But like Isaac Newton's law of gravity, what goes up must come down. I will tell you overall that the more inclusive that you become, the more included you will feel.